5 minutes.
Chairman, thank you very much. It's hard for me to believe that this is a congressional hearing in 2019. It feels like a scene out of the Handmaid's Tale, what we're witnessing across the country and what we're hearing about today. So, Dr. Robinson, you practice in Alabama, is that right? And Alabama may soon have a law, tell me if I'm correct, which would compel a 15-year-old girl who's been raped by her stepfather to bring the pregnancy to term. And if a doctor honored her wish to have an abortion, that doctor would be facing 99 years in prison. Do I understand this law correctly?
That is correct. And like I said in my testimony, there is no other area of medicine where physicians are being threatened with criminalization like this. If you were the patient, you would want to be your physician's number one priority when you're sitting in front of them. And with women, this should be the same. We shouldn't have physicians put in a place where they're having to contemplate criminal prosecution versus proceeding with doing what's best for their patients. And if you don't mind, I would like to go back and refer to the question that was asked of Mrs. Phillips, because I am a physician.
Please.
And states already have laws in place to protect neonates. But it is very, very important to understand that the scenario that was described is not the situation that we are seeing in abortion care here. I can't imagine any situation where that would happen. And I think it's really, really important that we understand.
And if it does happen, it should be illegal, right? If there are unsanitary conditions, if the women are not treated properly, that is obviously a violation of every regulation and law, and whoever does that should be dealt with accordingly.
Exactly, and it's important to keep in mind that the majority of abortions take place early in the first trimester. We're not seeing women having abortions in the third trimester.
Can I ask you about that? I've got a million questions for you, Dr. Robinson. Your story just seems extraordinary to me. We've heard from our friends across the aisle, and I appreciate the intellectual honesty today, but I want America to hear this. We have heard now that when a sperm unites with an egg, that is a human life. And the logic of that is the Alabama law, which is if it was the product of a rape, it was the product of incest, if the woman or girl is in no condition to start a family, to be a mother, still, that girl would be forced to go ahead and to have a baby, even if it's week 3, week 4, because the moment, as I understand my colleagues, and the gentleman from Louisiana, I think, was very clear about it, when the egg and the sperm unite, that's a life, and that's when it kicks in. Now, let me ask you about that. You bring a lot of babies into existence, right? You are in OBGYN, and so what do you think about this claim that it should be a criminal act for someone to terminate a pregnancy at 1 month, which was clearly protected under Roe versus Wade? It was clearly protected under Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which drew the line at viability outside the womb of the mother.
Well, I don't support any legislation that pushes abortion care out of the reach of women. I know as a physician that it is really important that all women have access to the care they need, regardless of the point they are in their pregnancy. And I know that any legislation that takes this out of the hands of physicians and patients puts those women at risk.
Thank you. Ms. Dolphin, let me come to you. So it's very clear that all of this litigation is meant to go up to the Supreme Court, which they have successfully gerrymandered now because of the stonewalling of my constituent Merrick Garland, who didn't get a Supreme Court confirmation hearing for a year. But they think now they've got the perfect straight flush. They're going to be able to destroy Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and our colleagues across the aisle are cheering them along. Okay. Now, let's say this were to happen. I want to go back to this very interesting question about sterilization and compulsory abortion. If the choice is not a woman's to decide what happens with her pregnancy pre-fetal viability, which is the Casey framework, so let's say Roe versus Wade is overturned, Casey is overturned. Could the 30 governments which had compulsory sterilization laws just in the last century, not even a century ago, could they go back to having a compulsory sterilization law? Could authoritarian right-wing governments throughout the country go to compulsory abortion laws for populations that they don't like, because it would not be a woman's right to choose. At that point, it would just be up to the government to decide what happens in the woman's womb?
This is a real concern if the court were to say that people do not have the right to control what happens with their own body. Even that's a very frightening prospect, and it could lead to the frightening prospects that you describe. But we also know is that—
And that's not a crazy hypothetical, right? A majority of the states in the country had compulsory sterilization laws for populations that were deemed unfit by essentially authoritarian governments, and most of them, or a lot of them, existing in the very states which today are trying to ban the woman's right to choose.
It's certainly true that this country has a disgraceful history of those types of laws. We see those kinds of, and we see that kind of thing happening today, even today, with the administration's policy of separating immigrant children from their families. So that's a real part of our history.
I yield back. Thank you very much.